Okay, in this video, I'm going to try and use Oversimplified's video on World War One to elaborate on the causes of the First World War, highlight its importance, what happened, and why it's such a complicated war to understand. Now, World War One is one of the most important wars of human history because the 20th century is largely a product of World War One, and many of the conflicts and events of the world that we take for granted in our more recent history, such as the Second World War, such as the Holocaust against the Jews, such as the development of atomic bombs, the space race, the rise of communism in what was once Russia and became the Soviet Union, the war on terror today, the Palestine Israel conflict, all of these events are in some way a product of the sequence of events that was initiated by the First World War. And hence, it's very, very important. Because in history, there are certain things which are known as turning points, where history unfolds in a certain way, and then along will come something and it will completely alter the way in which history is unfolding. And the First World War is an example of this. However, in spite of its importance, it's also a very difficult war to try and explain the causes. When we talk about what caused the First World War, most people will say there was the assassination of some archduke and that initiated the First World War. But how exactly did the assassination of one man trigger so many important events as a consequence? When the First World War took place, it was known as the Great War. It ended a age, or kind of like the European Golden Age, where prosperity and medicine and scientific revolution had positively affected the European continent. And the last thing that people would have wanted would be a long, drawn out war that would last from 1914 up until 1918.
The world of 1914, a time of modern technology, culture, and fashion. Truly the height of civilization. Let's have a war.
That's actually a good way of explaining the problem of the First World War. Because for the past 100 years in Europe, which at this stage is the world hegemon, by this stage in world history, the European continent began in England, spread to the rest of the continent, had experienced the Industrial Revolution. They had colonized various parts of the world. It was an age of prosperity. From a Eurocentric perspective, the period from the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 up until the beginning of the First World War in 1914 was a time of prosperity and economic growth. So why would they risk all of that by having a war? And this war wasn't just a typical type of war, especially, from about the time of the fall of the Roman Empire up until maybe the Napoleonic Wars. Wars generally were more the privy of the elite. But the First World War is going to become an industrial war. It's going to last for a very long time, and it's going to be extremely devastating. Young men are going to be sent to live in the trenches. It's going to be one of the most horrendous wars. So why would they end this golden age that they were experiencing to have such an ugly, long, drawn-out war?
We knew a big war was coming. France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Germany wanted to take more.
Okay, so France wanted some stuff back that Germany had taken from it. Alsace and Lorraine were two French regions that the Germans had taken during the Franco-Prussian War between Prussia and France by 1870. Prussia defeated France, merged with its German-speaking neighbors, formed Germany. From the end of the Napoleonic Wars up until the First World War, there were very few wars that had taken place in Europe, at least. There were colonial wars where the battlefield was really unfit, for lack of a better term. One side had the Maxim gun, the other side didn't. But for that 100 years, at least there was peace in Europe. One exception was the Franco-Prussian War, in which the Germans, or the Prussians, defeated the French and took Alsace and Lorraine from the French. And it kind of led the French to want revenge over the Germans.
Everyone's stuff, and they were building a big sexy navy that was making the British uncomfortable.
Sometimes when people try to explain what are the causes of the First World War, they sometimes use the acronym MAIN, the main causes or long-term causes: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. And Germany, kind of this new nation state that was established in the 1870s, suddenly became one of, if not the most powerful state in Europe, kind of overnight, and became a threat to its neighbors. But it was also industrializing very quickly, and it was trying to build a very powerful navy. Britain, at this point in time, not the most significant land force in the European continent, but definitely the strongest navy. And in Germany building its powerful navy, militarism was kind of seen by the British as being a threat. Why is Germany building a strong navy? Are they going to try and attack our colonies? Also, at this point in time, the scramble for Africa had taken place not too long ago. European powers were carving up Africa amongst themselves. Germany had only recently been established, and hence Germany did not have as many colonies as some of the other European powers.
These two empires thought they were really cool, but lots of different.
Another thing is imperialism. At this point in time, it's kind of like the end of empires, the emergence of nations. If you people, if you speak the same language, if you have the same culture, if you German-speaking territories merge to form the German state, Italian-speaking territories merge to form the Italian states. But in this world, you kind of have two things happening. You still got the age of empires and the age of nation states at the same time. And Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire are two empires that are made up of peoples who feel that they do not belong as part of that empire, but they want to assert their nationalism. So you can think of these two big empires as being a collection of smaller states within it. So potential states, people who want to assert their nationalism, break away from these dying empires and become independent nation states.
Different people who lived there didn't think it was so cool, and some of them had even been declaring independence with help from Russia. Everyone was talking about each other behind each other's backs, throw in the fact that military technology had come a long way since the last major war.
So the last major war, okay, the Franco-Prussian War was a significant war. The Russo-Japanese War was also a significant war. In South Africa, the Second Anglo-Boer War. But the last really major European war would be the Napoleonic Wars, which ended in about 1815. And since then, there hasn't been a lot of European wars. It's generally more regional types of war. But technology had accelerated so much that if a war breaks out at this point in time, it would be kind of impossible to predict how devastating such a war could be. And that is what's going to happen here. Now, leading up to the First World War, there are alliances that are being established. So these kind of states that are established in Europe at this point in time, Germany, well, you can talk about six great powers: Germany, Austria Hungary, Russia, Britain, France, Italy. They kind of realize that if a war breaks out, it's going to be very, very dangerous. If France is next to Germany, they know that Germany is more powerful and they know that Germany will defeat France. So it would be in their best interest to have alliances. Now, the architect of the system of alliances was Otto von Bismarck, the German chancellor. And he was a very skilled negotiator, very skilled diplomat. And he kind of manufactured this type of alliance system because Germany, if you were to just go back to a map of Britain, is emerged in the 1870s as one of the most powerful states in Europe, but is surrounded by other states and other potentially jealous states. So, from the German perspective, Otto von Bismarck's perspective, make it impossible for the other states to want to gang up on Germany because most of these states have kind of rivalries. So, always make sure that you have allies on your side. And he made sure that he had Russia and Germany on the same side with an alliance system. Austria-Hungary would also be in alliance with Germany. So if France or Britain or someone tried to attack Germany, it would have to attack Germany and its allies. And this system kind of kept peace. But after Kaiser Wilhelm I died and his son, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Kaiser kind of means Caesar, king of Germany, king of the German Empire, he dismissed Otto von Bismarck as the Chancellor of Germany. Otto von Bismarck had this gigantic personality, this huge presence. Kaiser Wilhelm II, he got his own inadequacies, one withered away arm, kind of becomes king, wants to assert, or Kaiser wants to assert himself, decides that the best way to do it is to dismiss Otto von Bismarck, but he was unable to maintain the balance or this of alliances that Otto von Bismarck had, and he wasn't able to manage tensions between Russia and Austria-Hungary, and Russia broke away from its alliance with Germany, and that provided France with the opportunity to have an alliance with Russia. And suddenly now, if a war breaks out, you've got a group of allies versus a group of allies. So if some little incident is going to cause one European country to go to war with another European country, it's going to be that European country and its friends or its allies going to war with the other European country and its friends or allies. So the system of alliances is what converts what could have been a regional war into a world war. So the incident that would spark this would be the Austro-Hungarian being assassinated by a Serbian, but rather than Austria-Hungary going to war with Serbia, Austria-Hungary and its allies go to war with Serbia and its allies, and hence it becomes a world war.
The fact that military technology had come a long way since the last major war, and suddenly everyone was pretty eager to beat each other up. In this area of Austria-Hungary live some Serbs and Bosnians who hated living in Austria.
Okay, so this is actually going to be the spark that is going to initiate the outbreak of the First World War. So think of it this way. Leading up to 1914, for the past 100 years, no major war in Europe other than the Franco-Prussian War, but a lot of potential for a devastating war. Industrial revolution, countries are arming, countries have rivalries with one another, there are empires that are kind of breaking apart, nation states that are being established, all this rivalries, competition for colonies abroad, and tension. And in response to the tension, countries decide that the best way of preventing themselves being attacked by one of their rivals is to have as many friends as possible. But now, if you think of it like in the schoolyard, you got two kind of gangs being established. Well, one group of friends and another group of friends. And if some little spark initiates a conflict between two individuals, it could mean a world war, because it's not just the two individual countries, but it's that country and their friends going to war with one another. So the incident is going to happen here in the Balkans, Austria-Hungary, this large breaking apart empire made up of many people who don't want to be part of the empire anymore. The leader of the emperor of Austria-Hungary, Franz Joseph, is very, very old, on his last stages, very unpopular amongst some of the people he rules over. His nephew, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who, unlike his uncle, is actually more willing to actually be less hostile to like the Serbians and things like that. So the irony is that he's going to be killed by a Serbian and initiate this war. He decides to go to Sarajevo in what is Bosnia, which is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but it's made up of a lot of Slavic people who identify more with the Serbians and some of these other groups that want to break away from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He goes there at a time that the Battle of Kosovo is being commemorated. It's kind of seen by Slavs as a very insulting thing to do. Nonetheless, he visits Sarajevo, and it's going to be over here where he is going to be assassinated, and the famous assassination which would initiate the First World War.
Austria-Hungary. So the Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes there for a nice drive in an open-top car with his car's route published in advance. And that went just about as well as you'd expect. Some assassins were waiting for him along the way and threw bombs at his car, but they missed and blew up some officers behind him instead. So the Archduke goes into hiding, leaves Sarajevo, and the whole war never happens. Except no, the Archduke doesn't leave, but instead goes back out in the open-top car to visit the injured officers in hospital.
Making a joke over here, but that's actually kind of the humor of the joke highlights just how by chance this happened, because the Archduke Franz Ferdinand goes in an open top vehicle to Sarajevo, and a group of assassins known as the Black Hand are plotting his assassination. And they attack in the morning, and it's unsuccessful. They throw a bomb at the vehicle in which he's traveling. He ducks. The bomb hits the door of the vehicle, bounces off, explodes into another vehicle, and causes casualties. It was a bad idea for Archduke Franz Ferdinand to go to Sarajevo. He might be more of a peacemaker or wanting to mend relations with Serbia when compared to his uncle, but nonetheless, he is still seen as an enemy, still seen as a representative of this hostile Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is denying the rights of people to assert their right to self-determination or become independent states. So they see him as the enemy. This terrorist organization attempt to assassinate him. It's unsuccessful. The individual that throws the bomb, he tries to um, take a poison pill and drown himself in the river, but it's not successful. He gets taken out and arrested. And in this group of assassins, there's a young guy named Gabrielo Princip, 19 years old, would otherwise be maybe unremarkable, but it's going to be him that is going to initiate the First World War, and all the things that follow from the First World War would be initiated by an otherwise insignificant 19-year-old. When I say insignificant, I just mean that he was just an ordinary person, not of royalty, just a member of this terrorist organization that wants to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So the group go attempt to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. It is unsuccessful. Gabrielo Princip, very disappointed, gives up, goes to a restaurant to have a sandwich, and by coincidence, he's going to find himself face to face with the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, because after the failed assassination attempt, rather than go back home, he decides to visit the individuals who were injured in the bomb blast earlier of the day. And he travels to the hospital. And when he travels to the hospital, the driver gets a little bit lost, tries to reverse one of these olden day cars, which not like today's cars, the engine stalls, and by coincidence, Gabrielo Princip, who's having a sandwich at the restaurant, walks out and sees the person who he had planned to assassinate earlier in the day right there, right in front of him, pulls out his gun and shoots the Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
The driver takes a wrong turn and by sheer coincidence gets stuck beside one of the failed assassins, who shoots him. Austria-Hungary is understandably pissed about all this, and they...
So, just the assassination of one individual is going to bring about the outbreak of the First World War and the millions that are going to die. Not just the amount of human death, but the amount of, the fact that all these young men are leaving behind their other contributions in society. It's going to be a very, very devastating thing to the European continent. It's also going to mean that Europe has colonies. Many people from the colonies are also going to be dragged into this war. And it's all because of a 19-year-old shooting the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, why did this become so devastating? I'll just let the video play and then just explain.
They think the Serbian government had something to do with it, which they might have. So they go to their ally Germany and say, hey Germany, we're going to declare war on Serbia, and Germany is all for that. So Austria-Hungary send a big list of impossible demands to Serbia, and when Serbia refuses, they declare war. Austria-Hungary and Germany are friends, and Serbia is protected by Russia, who's friends with France, so they'll declare war on each other.
So this kind of really explains the dilemma here. So the Austro-Hungarians, the future heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Franz Joseph is old, on the last stages of his life. He'll pass away, so the future heir would be Franz Ferdinand, who would replace him. And when the Serbian nationalist, part of this terrorist organization, murders him, Austria-Hungary has to do something about this. They can't allow this to happen. And they believe that the Serbian government was behind this. It was state-sponsored terrorism. It wasn't just Gabriel Princip and his little terrorist organization, but it might have been the Serbian government that might have been behind it. So they issue an ultimatum to the Serbians. Now, the ultimatum is as such that it's almost designed to be rejected. It's kind of impossible for Serbia to accept such demands because it would be in violation of its own sovereignty if it complies to some of the conditions on that ultimatum. So Serbia is going to need to appeal to its ally, Russia, big, powerful Russia. Tsar Nicholas, also Serbians, Slavic. Hopefully they will come to their aid. And he asked Russia, if Austria-Hungary declares war, would Russia come on its behalf and help defending against Austria-Hungary, which the Russians do. Austria-Hungary is aware of this, and therefore they would ask their big allies. So Franz Joseph would ask Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, if they get involved in a European war and they fight Russia and Serbia, will Germany come to Austria-Hungary's aid? Kaiser Wilhelm II offers the blank check, says yes, it will. But Russia has an alliance with France because they are have this alliance. So if Russia goes to war with Germany and Austria-Hungary, France would have to come to Russia's aid. So that might bring the French into the war. Now, Britain has a kind of it's difficult to. It's not a formal alliance with France. It's sometimes referred to more like a handshake deal, but a kind of alliance with France. So there's potential that Britain might even be involved in this war. Britain might be able to pull out the excuse and say that it's an aggressive war. They're not going to get involved, etc. They have no legally binding um, document that says that they have to come to France's aid if a war breaks out. Now, ironically, Italy is part of the Central Powers, as they'll become known as. They have an alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. Italy is not ready for war in 1914, so Italy kind of used the excuse that this war, Austria-Hungary and Germany, as we'll see, are the aggressors. They have a defensive alliance, and they will use that excuse to stay out of the war. Later on, as the war progresses, they'll get bribed by the Allies that if they come and switch sides and join the Allies against the Central Powers or the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia against the Central Powers, then they will get some territory as a reward. Okay, I'm jumping ahead now. But this is kind of the system of alliances that's going to break out. Now, I think I'll let Oversimplified cover the rest before I start commenting.
Montenegro joins in too. France and Britain also have a kind of alliance. So when France says, "Hey Britain, you got my back," Britain is like, maybe. And then they decide to stay out of it, which is great for Germany because Germany has a plan. They know that Russia is so big and clumsy that it will take them a while to get ready for war. So with this guy in charge, Germany will send all its troops into France at lightning speed while Russia's getting ready, defeat France, then move all the troops to Russia and defeat Russia, and then we all speak German and eat Pfefferpottast every day. Just one problem. France has loads of forts and defenses along its German border, and Germany can't waste any time fighting them, so Germany decides to go around them through Belgium.
Okay, so one of the ironies again about the First World War is that a Serbian kills a Austro-Hungarian, but Germany invades Belgium to get to France. Now, why exactly is that the case? Why would Germany go and attack Belgium to attack France when the cause of the conflict was Austro-Hungary and Serbia? It's because leading up to the First World War, there was always this potential that a war could take place. If you look at the map, you'll see that Germany and Austria-Hungary are surrounded by hostile powers. France and Russia have an alliance. So there was always this speak that what would Germany do if a European war breaks out and they're surrounded on both sides? And the plan that was designed by Schlieffen was the Schlieffen Plan, where the idea is that fighting a war on two fronts, east and west, is too difficult to do at the same time. Doesn't matter how strong the German army is, it's not an effective way to fight. You can't have half your forces fighting the Russians, the other half fighting the French. It's going to be difficult, it's going to be drawn out. That is what would happen in World War I. But the Schlieffen Plan was designed to prevent this from happening. So the idea was that Russia is bigger than France. Now, France was defeated very quickly in the Franco-Prussian War. So Germans knew that they could take out France relatively quickly. So the idea is defeat France first, while Russia is still mobilizing. The stereotype about Russia, it's very big, but it's also very slow. It's not industrialized. It'll take them a long time to organize and raise an army to go and attack either Austria-Hungary or Germany. So the idea is you quickly go in, attack France, defeat France, and then maybe that'll take about 6 weeks at the most. During that 6 weeks, Russia is still mobilizing. Once France is out the way and defeated, Germany can then concentrate all its efforts and go back and fight Russia. The problem is the French border with Germany is heavily fortified. Okay, this is not yet the Maginot Line that would exist in the beginning of the Second World War, but it's something similar. A long line of fortifications, heavy artillery or large guns pointed towards Germany. If the Germans try to attack on this fortified position, it's not going to make the Schlieffen Plan work. It's going to take way longer than 6 weeks to defeat France. So the idea is, if they go through neutral Belgium, then they can enter France here, make use of Belgium's roads and railways, enter France, take France out quite quickly, and then be ready for the Russians. However, it does mean invading a neutral country. And they asked Belgium permission to use Belgium's roads, railways, and Belgium refused. They say, we're not part of this war. We're not going to help support you by letting you, Germany, use us to invade France. And Germany decides, the only way to make the Schlieffen Plan work is to get to France as quickly as possible. So once, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, so Serbia rejects the ultimatum of Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary. Germany has to act quickly, get France out of the way before the Russians are mobilized, so they invade Belgium. Now, unlike the treaty that the French had with Britain, which was kind of like a handshake deal, something that the British could kind of easily get out of, they had a far more binding treaty protecting Belgian neutrality. And when the Germans invaded Belgium, the British felt honor bound to come to Belgium's aid. And this is going to bring the British into the war.
Anytime fighting them, so Germany decides to go around them through Belgium. Belgium is neutral, but Germany wants to march 750,000 troops through it to get around France's defenses. They're hoping Belgium will just kind of sit down and shut up, but they don't. They fight back, and they're pretty good too, so they slow the Germans down. What's worse is that Britain shows up, and they're pretty pissed that Germany's invading neutral countries. So now Britain declares war on Germany. So Germany push on through Belgium and commit some atrocities along the way. They also
This is a huge disaster for Germany now, because for this Schlieffen Plan to work, they need to get to France as quickly as possible. The resistance that the Belgians put back is going to be a major disaster. Another thing is the numbers of people that are involved in this conflict. But during Napoleonic Wars, prior to that, wars were generally a small thing done by the elites, the wealthy. Most of the peasants were not armed. The last thing that a monarch would want to do was arm its peasantry, would uprise and overthrow them. This came to an end during the Napoleonic Wars. When Napoleon went to war with most of the European countries, he kind of created a people in arms and mass armies. Napoleon would sometimes brag about being willing to lose 30,000 men in a month, something that was unheard of at the time. But by World War One, this is now the norm. And with the technology, war is going to be very, very devastating. So Germans try to march thousands through Belgium. The Belgians put up very, very good resistance against the Germans, slow them down, and it's also going to bring the British into the war. But when the Germans enter Belgium, they're going to do a lot of atrocities, and this is going to have negative effects for the Germans in the long run, particularly because of the United States. The United States of America, they stay out of World War One because the United States, made up of descendants from various parts of Europe, rather be neutral. They will not want to take any side. But as time progresses, the Germans more and more make themselves kind of appear like the bad guys. So if the Americans ever get involved in the war, the Germans kind of make it easier for the Americans to choose the allies. And one of the things that the Germans do is the massacring of Belgian civilians when they invade Belgium. Because from the German perspective, they need to get to France as quickly as possible. They give orders to the Belgian citizens. We're not here for you. We're here to get to France. Don't blow up railways. Don't blow up bridges. Don't blow up roads. Belgian citizens do this. Belgian snipers who are hidden in buildings. The Germans don't know who's enemy, who's civilian. So they resort to a lot of atrocities. And this the British will use on the propaganda machine, and the Americans reading the newspapers will see the atrocities that the Germans are committing against the Belgians, and this would all mark the beginning of American kind of resentment towards the Germans. Later on, they'll eventually get involved in the war.
Spikes and sometimes skulls on the uniform. So if you're trying to not look like the bad guys, good job. The Allies have a propaganda extravaganza, and this starts having an influence around the world, notably in America. The US President Woodrow Wilson sees himself as a bit of a Jesus figure and spends most of the war trying to get everyone to just hug it out. But there's also a large population of ethnic Germans living in the United States, and when the war first broke out, they were like, yay, Germany. But now that they're committing atrocities in Belgium, they're less enthusiastic. Let's play Spot the French Soldier. Did you see him? Easy, right? He's wearing a bright blue uniform with red trousers. And do you know who else spotted him easily too? The Germans. So when the French were slowly marching...
Now, this is just a reminder that when this war breaks out, vast majority of countries have no recent history of being involved in a modern warfare. wars were so long ago. The Franco-Prussian War was about 40 years ago. The Napoleonic Wars were about 100 years ago. Britain in South Africa during the Second Anglo-Boer War at least had some kind of experience in how modern war is going to look like. But these soldiers, the vast majority of them, they don't know what a modern war looks like because the last time they went to war, they were not using machine guns. They were not using the type of heavy artillery and the type of technology that existed in 1914. So a lot of mistakes are going to be made. And in this instance, one of the mistakes that the French make is that they wear brightly colored clothes. The British and the Germans wear darker colored clothes, khaki clothes, makes it much more difficult to see in the muddy terrain, whereas the French almost look like targets. So for German snipers, it's very, very easy. Bright red pants or bright blue pants and red coats. Blue coats and red pants. Very easy to spot them, and they look like targets. And the French will make a lot of mistakes. Another type of mistake that they make is they use old methods of fighting. So when the Germans do invade France through Belgium, the French kind of have outdated tactics. Bravery, charging at the enemy fire on horseback, which is something that you can't do in the age of machine guns. It takes the French a long time to learn this lesson. That is a bad idea. And while they're learning this lesson, unfortunately for France, it just means that they're wasting human life unnecessarily.
In columns through the countryside, the Germans easily tore them to shreds with their giant guns. All the nations involved in this war went in with an old school war mentality, and all of them had to update their uniforms and tactics a lot during the Great War. Because this war was going to be like nothing anyone had ever seen before. Russia's ready for war, and way earlier than expected.
So another massive blow to the Germans now is that the Russia mobilized much quicker than the Germans had predicted. Now, Hermann von Moltke the Younger, who is the commander of the German army at this point in time, he has a very difficult task at hand. He has to make the Schlieffen Plan work. Schlieffen designed the Schlieffen Plan at a different time than the time in which von Moltke is the commander of the army. His uncle, Hermann von Moltke Sr., was a very respected German general, played an important role in the Franco-Prussian War. But von Moltke, he's kind of very different. He preferred to be an artist rather than military commander, operating a lot of pressure, has to make the Schlieffen Plan work in a time which is many years after the Schlieffen Plan was originally designed. And one of the mistakes that was made was that Russia mobilized much quicker than the Schlieffen Plan had predicted that Russia would mobilize its army. And now Germany, the part of the Schlieffen Plan was hit France with everything that the Germans have quickly, get rid of them. Then, once they are out, send that force back to Russia. But if Russia is mobilized quicker than predicted, they can't have all their soldiers fighting in France and the eastern part of Germany not protected. Otherwise, the Russians would just march in and take over Germany. So they have to send soldiers to the eastern front to fight the Russians.
Hey, Austria-Hungary, can you get on top of that? Oh yeah, sure, we've got this. Nope.
And they can't rely on Austria-Hungary, who is doing a very, very bad job in the conflict.
Germany has to send some troops back to the east to defend against the Russians. The chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army is this guy, and although he is handsome, he turns out not to be the best military strategist. Austria-Hungary constantly ignores Germany's advice, and then comes running back to Germany whenever they get in trouble. Austria-Hungary even gets its ass kicked by tiny Serbia, who repels all their invasion attempts at the start of the war. It's better news for Germany in the north, though, where they almost completely wipe out the Russian Second Army. Back on the Western Front, the Germans continue advancing and are in sight of Paris. At this point, anyone would be forgiven for thinking the Germans were going to get that quick victory after all. But then things start to go wrong. The French commander-in-chief knew something had to be done, and he ordered his armies to stop retreating. In the resulting battle, a gap opened up in the German lines.
Up until this point, the French were just losing heavy casualties, being pushed back and back. The British Expeditionary Force, which were led by a guy named John French, British commander who actually did not like the French. The irony is he's named John French, getting very, very fed up with the French tactics and was on the stage of, rather than wasting British lives trying to defend the French, was actually going to go back to Britain because they felt that this was a losing battle. Joseph Joffre managed to convince him to remain. And in this battle here, Battle of the Frontiers, the British and the French managed to halt the German expansion. And during this conflict, a gap opened up in the German lines, which enabled British troops to penetrate that gap and potentially surround the Germans. So to prevent that from happening, the Germans had to stop their advancement and has to retreat.
Opens up, the enemy can use it to flank you from the side and behind, so the German armies have to retreat. The Allies launch a counterattack, so the Germans dig into defensive positions. The Allies do the same. Then both sides move north, trying to outflank each other along the way. When they
On the spur of the moment now, they came into this war not knowing what a modern war would look like, having outdated tactics. Now they have learned that when you're fighting machine gun or charging at the enemy is not a good idea, and it's better to fortify yourself. So they start building trenches almost spontaneously. It's just the automatic reaction to dealing with these types of weapons. Both groups start building trenches. There's a kind of race to the sea because you need to build a fortified line all the way from Switzerland, neutral Switzerland, all the way to the sea. Dig these trenches. Once the trenches are built, then you can defend and hold your line better. And this is going to characterize the Western Front of the First World War from this period, 1914, right up until the end of the war. This system of trench warfare.
They reach the sea, they're in a stalemate with trench systems running the whole way from the coast to Switzerland, the beginning of trench warfare on the Western Front. Here's how trench warfare works. Two opposing lines of trenches with no man's land in between. One side would pummel the other with hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, sometimes for days at a time. This had a huge psychological effect on the soldiers, leaving many shell-shocked. Then, the attacking troops would leave their trenches and rush across no man's land, a muddy wet mass of shell craters and barbed wire. The defending trench would unleash machine gun fire on the attackers, inflicting thousands of casualties. The attackers would send wave after wave until either they gave up or the opposing trench was finally overrun. There would be months of fighting and the deaths of thousands in order to gain a few meters or kilometers of land. Living in the trenches was hard work too. Corpses, mud that could swallow you whole, pools of poisonous water, rats, disease, the smell. It's insane that millions of soldiers put up with these conditions and
This is the stereotype about the First World War. The horrible life of trench warfare, living basically in a hole in the ground, constantly bombarded with heavy shells that the enemy is shooting at you, artillery shells all day long, being exposed to machine gun fire, living in a trench alongside other people, dead bodies, mud, etc., etc. Very, very horrendous conditions, and they characterize the First World War. So the thing about trench warfare, so you've got machine guns, you've got heavy artillery, you have barbed wire. So between the two enemy trenches, they erect barbed wires to prevent the enemy from being able to cross what's no man's land and enter into their trench. And then while that enemy is trying to cross no man's land, get through that barbed wire, it gives the defenders the opportunity to mow them down with machine gun fire. And constantly heavy artillery bombardment, which makes this very, very painstaking to live in these trenches out there in the open and be exposed to such a type of warfare. But it also means that these trenches are very good defensively, but so there's a lot of stalemate on the Western Front, not a lot of movement. The advantage, very good defensively, but not so good for attacking because trying to penetrate the enemy's trench is almost impossible. And a lot of wasted life for very, very little progress would happen over the next 4 years.
commanders ordered them to do so for years.
Okay, so that is the end of part one. I will make part two shortly and release that as well.